Hello and welcome to the Our Prenup Lawyer Podcast, where you and I get to learn more about prenups as I interview professionals from the fields of family law, couples counseling, and wealth management. I'm your host, Libby Garabedian. Let's get started. The information provided in this podcast is prepared by Our Prenup Lawyer for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The information is not intended to create an attorney-client relationship. This is not legal advice or a substitute for obtaining legal advice from an attorney. A person listening or watching should not rely upon it in any manner without engaging professional counsel. The podcast is intended to communicate general information and, because recorded, may not be current. On this episode of the Our Prenup Lawyer Podcast, we have Laurie Israel, a nationally known prenuptial agreement attorney and mediator who works with couples formulating prenups throughout the country. She is the author of the Marriage-Friendly Prenup, the Generous Prenup, and Mediating Prenups. Laurie's writings have appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Huffington Post, New York Magazine, and many other publications. She can frequently be heard sharing her views on prenuptial agreements on podcasts across the podcast sphere. Hi, Laurie. Thank you for being on the episode.
Thank you for inviting me, Libby. Great to meet you.
It's great to meet you too. Let's go ahead and get started. I want to start with your career. And how did you end up in family law?
It's a long story. I started out as a tax lawyer because I was forced to take a tax course in law school. I went to law school in Pennsylvania and it was required, and I loved it. So I took another 7 tax courses and I became a tax lawyer in a big firm for a while. And then I went out on my own and I tried all sorts of things. And I had no intention of becoming a family lawyer, but I got together with a group of women that met once a month to discuss cases, and they were all family lawyers, and it was like a totally new language to me. And in fact, when I got my first divorce case, they mentored me through it, even showing me where the courtroom was, which was in a maze. You had to go through file rooms and basements to get to this out of the center courtroom in the court that I was in. And I found that I love doing divorces. I love doing fair divorces where everybody got a fair shake and the process was civil. So I did a lot of negotiated divorces, collaborative divorces, mediated divorces. But at the same time, I had a estate planning practice. So I was working with people's wills, trusts. I'd probably written maybe 300 trusts, and I've looked at more than that. So I'm very familiar with trusts. And I enjoy that. I enjoyed that part of my practice also. So what happened is I got, all this work crept into more and more prenup work. And the kind of destructive process and the destructive results of those prenups really had an effect on me. I really wanted to change that. And so I spent 3 years writing my first book, which is The Generous Prenup. And in writing the book, it's very technical. It has a lot of research in it. It's meant for clients, people that are getting prenups. And it's also meant for lawyers and mediators. And so I learned a lot in writing this book. Kind of sometimes when you write a book, what is it, that 10,000 hour rule? You do something for 10,000 hours, you become an expert. So I became an expert. And since that book, my practice has led me towards now I'm only doing prenups. And mostly, I'm consulting, I'm doing prenups, representing people in Massachusetts where I practice, but I'm also mainly mediating them all over the country now.
So I want to talk about each of your books. Let's start with The Generous Prenup. What is a generous prenup?
Everybody's asking me that. And now that Travis Kelce is getting married to Taylor Swift, people are starting to ask me that because they're writing articles on it. Well, a generous prenup is one that each party feels good at, that it's good for them, that it feels fair. It's fair. They feel that they're being treated correctly. They feel like the other person is being treated correctly, the person they love. It's a prenup that doesn't destroy their love, and a lot of prenups do. A lot of prenups cause breakups even before the marriage, and sometimes they get married and it ruins their marriage. That happens a lot. A lot of the clients I see sometimes have been married with prenups that they hate, and we have to kind of undo them and do a postnup. So that's part of the generous prenup. Another part of the generous prenup is that separate property, which is very appropriate in some cases, but in first marriages, when the people are youngish and plan to have children, it can create a lot of separate property. And my theory, which I think is borne out by experience, is that separate property, when you have your own separate property and you're not sharing, the lack of sharing is destructive to marriages. So I'm really concerned not only just about the clients, who are usually both my clients, because I'm not representing them, I'm their mediator. So I'm a neutral party. But I'm also concerned about their marriage. And I'm hoping to guide them into a financial plan so that their marriage is a good one.
So what's the difference between the generous prenup and a marriage-friendly prenup?
Well, what happened with the marriage-friendly prenup is I never thought I'd write another book. And I was, happily practicing prenup work, with just the generous prenup. And then somebody came, a young person that from LinkedIn, and suggested I do the generous prenup as an Audible book. And I thought, no, this is a bad idea. It's very technical. It's very long. It has a really important index, and it just seems like not the right thing. But what I started to do is I started to write an Audible book. And it turned out to be the marriage-friendly prenup. So I started with the generous prenup. I took out all the case sites and the research and simplified it, eliminated some chapters, and it became the marriage-friendly prenup with no footnotes, no sites, no statute sites, no case sites. So it's kind of very user-friendly. It's not a dumbed-down book by any means, but it kind of takes the soul of my book, my generous prenup, and it also has another 7 years of experience to share with people.
Now, before we go into the process of mediating prenups, I do want to ask, in the marriage-friendly prenup, you talk about shadow parties. So how can they affect a couple's perspective when deciding the terms of their prenup?
Well, shadow parties are either parents or friends. Sometimes somebody has a friend that was through a divorce and they felt it was very fair, so they say, get a prenup. Or maybe the parents feel like their family wealth should be protected, or maybe they don't respect what the other spouse is bringing to the marriage as much as they should, because both people bring things to the marriage. Somebody called, there's sometimes a more moneyed spouse and a less moneyed spouse. And so I talked with somebody who called the less moneyed spouse that he is bringing human capital to the marriage. So money is not everything. So part of it is the parents. Sometimes it's the family advisors. If it's a very rich family, they have family offices with family advisors. Sometimes people are advised by their lawyers and their financial advisors that you should get a prenup, because they've been taught when they go to workshops that prenups are important for everybody. And my view on that is prenups can be really destructive if they're not done right and if the process isn't good. And they're especially destructive for young people entering a first marriage and having children, intending to have children together.
So when your process of mediating prenups, how do you facilitate communication between the parties so that they have autonomy over the process? Because obviously, like you said, there can be all these outside influences that affect them.
Well, one of the great things about mediation is that, first of all, I always talk to the two of them together. I never talk to them separately. And I never talk to the shadow parties either. I don't talk to the parents or anything. So they are my clients. They are my mediation clients. And they can say anything. And we talk through the problems of being forced to do this, or somebody is telling them to do it in a certain way. And we sift through that. Maybe somebody had a really bad divorce. Lots of times they'll go to an attorney and the attorney had a really bad divorce. Sometimes bad divorces are when there's a long-term marriage and they have to split their marital assets in half. That's not a bad divorce. That's normal in every state. But some people that go through it, there are bad divorces, and there are divorces that get litigated. And, one of the good things about mediating is that you can have an alternate dispute resolution clause that says you won't litigate. You'll do it another way, a better way. So that's one of the ways.
So how does your process of mediating prenups start when you sit down with a couple?
I don't go right to the terms. We take baby steps. First of all, I have to get to know them and they have to get to know me. Before we start work, I always have a 15 or so minute informational session where we can meet each other and I can explain the process. And then we go, in the first meeting, we go very slowly. I ask for financial information for them to upload on a secure website before the first meeting that I can go through. So I know something about the financial situations, because that's what we're really talking about, the financial plan for the marriage. So then we go, I find out about their families of origin, if they have children from prior marriages, about their careers, about their work, about their potential for inheritance, which we can kind of surmise, so that we start getting a financial picture. And I don't believe in giving people a meeting informational guidelines to fill out where they say everything, because I think you miss a lot by that. I think by actually speaking to people, things that would be kind of not brought up if they wrote down all their finances are not going to be uncovered. And those are really important things. I also find out about their emotional context with money, because people really have funny ideas about money, and sometimes neurotic ideas, and very often the couple may have different ideas. And then we start talking about, the easy part is to talk about, once we get through that background, which is really important, we talk about what they're going to do about money and earn money during their marriage, because that's kind of the easy part to start with.
In that estate planning aspect and the financial planning, do you feel you bring in your experience from tax law and your estate planning career to that?
Yeah, yes. We don't do the estate planning at that point, because that comes more from when we do, if the marriage dies in death, if the marriage ends in death. But yeah, the tax and the estate planning and probate even, and my experience in real estate, they all have a place. And business, sometimes people come with business interests, and you have to figure them out, and you have to figure what's fair with that. When you do the prenup, sometimes there's irrevocable trusts that are really complex, where very rich people put some of their money in irrevocable trust to get the growth on it out of their estate and into their children's estate. And we actually put those trusts up on a share screen and go through the important parts of it so people understand what they mean, what their options are, if they have any options, because it is important for people to have agency, even when they come from wealthy families, that they can control to a certain extent their own money.
How have you seen prenups change? Because I know you mentioned earlier how they've kind of become a little muddy in a way, but how has your philosophy on prenups changed over the course of your career?
Well, the first prenup I did a long time ago, I did the usual thing, which was, keep every separate property separate. And I was just really insensitive. I feel really bad about that. I hope that those people are still married. And, I hope it didn't do them too much harm. So my view has changed a lot. I just think the more sharing you can do, second marriages might be different in terms, but in most prenups, the more sharing you can do in the marriage, the better the marriage is going to be. Also, when I started doing prenups, with my new philosophy, which was look at the marriage also, it's not just about money. A lot of the other people doing prenups, mainly guys, said, "Oh no, this is just going to stay in a drawer, and it will only come out when you get divorced." And the horrible thing is that it always comes out because you either die or you get divorced, and it can cause harm even when it's in the drawer. And they also said, let's not have any estate planning requirements. You can do that in an estate plan. And the problem with that is that anybody can change their estate plan a day before they die. And some people do. So I think there needs to be a template for at least a minimum of what you're going to do for each other when you die. And that now is mainstream. And, I feel like I had a good influence on that change with other people. So I guess I don't know, every time I do one, because they're all different, they're like a puzzle. and everybody has different facts and different personalities and different backgrounds and different families, and they're all like a puzzle. So that's one of the things that's really intriguing for me to do them. And so I actually learn from each one that I do, and I feel like I can actually do a better job with what I learn. That's why they call it, when I'm a mediator, I'm not practicing law, but they call it practicing law and practicing medicine, because that's what happens when you have a career like that. You're always learning and doing it better.
It's not a one size fits all approach.
Yeah, absolutely not. It isn't. And I also very much respect what my clients' preferences are, although I do a lot more guidance than most prenup lawyers or prenup mediators. And because, and this is another of my pet peeves. You kind of alluded to this, or we talked about this before, that when young people are getting married, they really don't. I was a young person once. And, when you're a young person, you really don't fully know what marriage is. My theory is that the reason why older people cry at weddings is because, they don't know what the people are getting into. Marriage is a thing, and a long-term marriage is a real thing. It's like, it's different than anything else. And the problem with younger people making decisions about their marriage is that they're coming out of ignorance, really, I think. So that's why I'm against these online prenup sites, because there's not enough guidance. There's no guidance. I think that people that are doing prenups should see lawyers that are at least 50 years old, maybe older. It would be good if they are in a long-term marriage, and if not, maybe in a long-term marriage that ended with death or divorce, if they're not pro-prenup because they hated their divorce. I don't know. But, I think that's really important, because a lot of, I think that there's a lot of guidance involved in this. So that's the other thing that I offer, and I do more of that than most prenup mediators do, because I think it's important for people. I want to, and then my clients do have the choice to, I'll give them options, and they certainly have the authority to choose whatever options they want to. I just, part of the process is to present options, but when you don't know, if you're not, if you haven't been through a long-term marriage, or you're not a lawyer, or not a family lawyer, or not an estate planning lawyer, you don't know what the options are. So that you fixate on an option, and it may not be the best one for you and your partner, your new spouse, or one you even thought of. So that's something that mediators can provide, and lawyers, and representational lawyers.
And thinking about young people getting married and maybe not having that experience or the right hands-on guidance, I do want to ask, why do you think there is such a big push for Gen Z and millennials to get prenups?
I think it happens because of the media. And, there's a book that was written in 2000 that's still selling. And in that book, she says she thinks that 50% of people by, I don't know what she said, I think 2018 would have prenups. And it's way, way lower than that. First of all, most people don't have any money, so they're not going to have a prenup. And even the people with money, very low percentages have prenups. The higher percentage of second marriages of people with money. But most people in this country don't have significant money. So the rate of prenups is very low. But I think what's happening is that the media is touting prenups as a fair way to get married, and it's an independent way, and all that. And I just think that it's sending the wrong message to young people. So I think, if I may be bold, I think that young people are brainwashed into thinking that you should have a prenup. The other part of it that I really hate is that, the laws of divorce, sharing property in divorce, and the laws of what happens when somebody dies and you're married, they've been developed over centuries, and they've been fine-tuned, in the last 100 years to a set of laws that's actually really good. It's a wonderful set of laws because it's very fair, and it takes into account all sorts of all sorts of factual issues that couples have. And so, why should you throw that out, throw that great law, which is a product of great learning and great wisdom that people have in their marriages and judges have? Why throw that out and just say, oh, we're going to make our own rules because the state is going to make a prenup for us? The state's prenup is actually very good. The only problem with it is that you may have to litigate to get it enforced. But most people don't have to litigate when they get divorced.
Oh,
So I'm an anti-prenup lawyer.
well, that idea of your first marriage versus a second marriage, what's the difference between a prenup that you would write for someone who is going through their first marriage, if they decide they want one, or a couple in their second marriage who's more established?
In the first marriage, I think that it's important to share as much as possible. Because otherwise, if you have separate property, it pulls you apart. It's having a separate property is like having an affair with money that's not the marital money, and it's not good. It's not healthy. Okay, so as much as possible, as much as reasonable, try to share. In a second marriage, usually people want it because they have children from their first marriage. They each have children, or one of them has children. And when people are in that situation, they have a great loyalty to their children, but also a great loyalty to their new spouse. And there's a balancing that has to be done. And sometimes the new spouse has money, and so they don't have to be protected. But sometimes the new spouse doesn't have money and also needs protection. And so it's a totally different kind of prenup where separate property can be very appropriate. But also you have to look and see what the couple needs as a couple in terms of marital property or support after somebody dies, inheritance support, or even alimony if the marriage breaks up.
And prenups enable couples to have those difficult conversations about money that they need to be having anyway. Let's say that maybe the marriage isn't going to work once they start going through this process. Can that be a good thing?
Well, first of all, I don't think that people have very productive, in general, my view, meeting with people after their conversations with each other. Oftentimes, those conversations get very hot. And I think having a neutral mediator, a neutral facilitator for those discussions is very important. So the moment it gets hot, in each discussion, I think that the people should find a mediator, a lawyer mediator who's experienced in this, and start, having a three-way, because there's no reason for it to go down like that. But it will go down like that when two people talk directly. And also remember, you're talking from ignorance anyway. If you're young and not being married, you don't have that much life experience. So, so that's one thing. What was the question you asked? I got off on a little tangent.
That's all right. Enabling couples to have those difficult conversations about money, and if they're going through the prenup process. And
if they break up before the prenup because they're not having productive conversations, they don't agree about money. Lots of people that are married don't agree about money, and so I just don't think I think not agreeing about money is not the most important thing in a marriage. I don't think. And I think that, going to a couples counselor and talking about that, or a good lawyer a good lawyer mediator and talking about money, because, people very often, when you ask couples, I think statistically, couples that are in marriages, mostly money is like the biggest problem they have. Different views of money, different ways of spending, different expectations. So, some of that can be worked out in the prenup process. And if it can't be, some people do break up, either when they talk to each other about money or when they start negotiating a prenup, either through attorneys or even if they go through the mediation process. Although the mediation process is much better than starting with two attorneys, because I think I'm having an effect because attorneys are more likely now to try to be collaborative and try not to have hard dealing. But even as recently as 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and even now sometimes, hard dealing, trying to get as much as you can, the rich person trying to get as much as they can, and taking away rights of the other person, that's usual in prenup negotiations with attorneys. And it's not good. It's very destructive for both parties who love each other and want to get married.
So even if a couple doesn't necessarily see eye to eye, a mediator like you or someone else can create an environment for an amicable, collaborative.
Yes, yeah, money isn't everything. And the couple that's troubled about it, they probably think it is, but it isn't. And I think somebody a neutral can, or a therapist can, disabuse them of that fairly easily. And that's the problem also. All this media about prenups is implying that money is the most important thing. Okay, here's an example. In every state, when you earn money during the marriage, it doesn't matter whether you earn 20,000 and your partner earns 400,000. It's considered equal. It's considered joint and equal and shared. A prenup can say no. It's not equal. And a young person without experience might say, "Oh yeah, that's a terribly unfair rule. Let's make it that the other person gets to keep most of their money." And that seems fair, but it doesn't reflect that, when people bring things to the marriage, it's not just their earning capacity, it's everything else. There's so much more than money to a marriage.
If you do have a situation where someone is staying at home to take care of the kids, they decide on these roles, and the other person is going to be the primary earner, how do you write that into a prenup to equalize the marriage so that, like you're saying, it doesn't end up where what one spouse is bringing to the marriage isn't valued?
Yeah, well, here's where state law is perfect on it. Like, you consider all earnings during the marriage, including retirement earnings, are marital, and they get divided 50-50 in every state, unless there's a reason not to divide. Usually it's just 50-50 everywhere. Whether you're in a community property state like California or Texas, or whether you're in a state like Massachusetts or New Jersey or Illinois, it's, earnings in a marriage, no matter who earns them, that's what marital property is. And it's divided 50-50 in a divorce. And then the other issue is what happens to separate property, and then which you can determine in a prenup. You can make rules on that if there is separate property, and what happens to the spousal support. And you can make some guidelines about that in a prenup. But young people are saying, "Oh, I'm working now, so I'm going to waive alimony forever and ever," and both sides of the couple will say that. But that's very, very, for young people starting out, that's not looked at very fondly by courts once they get the prenup, and it's not workable. With older people that have assets, it can be workable.
So what do you think is essential to a couple having a successful marriage, prenup or not?
Sometimes people say that they should, required should be several sessions with a rabbi or a minister or a priest or something. I think people should go into marriage blind and work things out once they're married, because it's different once you're married. And so my recommendation is, if you can avoid a prenup, there's lots of situations where you need to that I think you need to have a prenup. And I'm only talking about first marriages of relatively young people now. If there's a lot of family wealth, if there's family irrevocable trusts, if the spouse is in a business where they're actively engaged in a business that they own, and it's not a personal service business. A personal service business is just where, like, I'm a lawyer, it's a personal service business. The business is me. So, if I'm not, I can't sell this business because people are asking to see me. So, but sometimes businesses are very complex. So there's that. And if somebody has a child of a previous marriage, if there's a lot of premarital property on one side, it might be a good idea to have a prenup just to decide how to handle that. And it may be that it keeps it separate. It may be that it vests during the marriage into marital property, like after some years. It may be that some of it stays separate, some of it doesn't. So there are reasons for young people to have prenups, but I think most young people, I would advise, shouldn't. And if somebody came to me that I think shouldn't have one, I I would say you shouldn't have one. It's going to be more harm than good, and I wouldn't work with them on it because I think it would be not moral of me to work with them.
Okay, so thinking about high assets, high net worth, you mentioned them earlier. Obviously, everyone knows about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift's engagement. I do want to ask, do you think they would be a good couple for a prenup?
Prenup? Yes, I think it would be very good. Somebody that asked me, I'm starting to get requests for interviews on that. I'm going to research this afternoon. But here's what I think. There's a new way to do this. I think it's a first marriage for both of them. And I think that they're in their 30s. I haven't researched this yet, but I think that they have. I just looked up. I think she has a net worth of 1.3 billion or something, and he's no slouch, for his millions. Here's what works for a lot of people like that. It's kind of like a skeletal prenup. It says that everything that they're going to do a net worth calculation. So whatever Taylor's net worth is and whatever Kelsey's, Travis's net worth is, that's going to be the basis of their separate property. And then anything that they gain afterwards, either of them gain, is marital property. And so that means if they get divorced, Taylor would get her 1.3 billion back. Travis would get whatever he has, like say maybe he has, 300 million. And then everything else, all the increases in that. And it doesn't matter how they invest their separate property because it's just a number. And all the rest of the property is shared in a divorce kits 50-50. And then they can make their own rules about what happens when they die, either everything to the survivor or if they die and they're married to each other when one of them dies.
Well, thank you for answering.
That's my solution for them, not having researched it, assuming that they don't have children from previous marriages and all that.
Thank you for answering that. I know I put you on the spot with that question, but
I have to talk to somebody at 5:30 today, a reporter about it. So you got me started anyway.
Oh, good. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. And I do want to ask, how can listeners reach you if they're interested in connecting?
I have a website that's very simple. It's laurieisrael.com. No attorney or no mediator, just laurieisrael.com. And also my email is laurie@laurieisrael.com. So that's the best way. And if they contact me, they shouldn't tell me too much about their situation because I may be mediating and I want to come with a fresh mind and not know what anybody's views or desires are at that point. And I also happy to talk to people, just without it being a case for me, just to kind of guide people. And also I talk to a lot of professionals, lawyers and mediators, and give them some advice about prenups too. So I welcome those calls also.
Thank you. And I'll make sure to include that in the show notes. So if people didn't get a chance to write that down, they can go ahead and get your website there.
Good. Thank you. This was a very interesting interview. You have very good questions.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hopefully I get to talk to you again soon.
Yes, good. Thanks.
That's our show, folks. Thank you for listening to Our Prenup Lawyer. Make sure to like and subscribe, and feel free to drop a comment below. Follow us on Instagram at Our Prenup Lawyer, and listen to us on Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and watch us on YouTube. See you guys next time.